So Glory Maelstrom support has been out this month. Super excited to give you an updated deck profile, a different approach that you can take with the deck. And the deck is still going for its winning image. It wants to do multi-attack. It also using the sequencing of restanders or swappers. And then of course take advantage of Glory's power up with Judgment Maelstrom and also the guard restriction that it can have on turn 4. The different approach with this deck profile will be increasing the speed of it to see your pieces faster and more consistently, and also generating advantage as a byproduct too. One of the weaknesses that Aquaforce has had over the years is that it needs to commit pieces to the board, but it also sometimes you don't have the right pieces, or you just don't have a big enough hand to guard everything and also just survive. So let's get right into it. Check out Dueling Guard's deck boxes, playmats, and binders. The great quality products that are anime based. They continually have more anime options becoming available. Use the affiliated link in the description for a 5% discount on your next purchase. Real quickly with the right line, just to knock that out, you're still playing the same right line. You have your Eric, you have your Theo, your Algos. Algos is still important on making those top 7 searches to call and start board building essentially. And then of course we have our Glory that you want to ride ASAP because on turn 4, we want to Persona ride, so that's always key. With the rest of the main deck, we still have maximum copies of Glory Maelstrom. Again, you want to Persona ride, and it's another 13k beater. It's a good swapper if you need to, but most of the time you want to keep copies in your hand so you're able to Persona ride consistently if you need to do a turn 5. 4 copies of the original Maelstrom still. This is still an important piece to find to shove into Soul immediately so you get all the benefits with Glory. This deck literally wants this card to shine as much as possible. And this is typically your 4th, 5th, 6th attacker. And it's easy to pull off 2 of these to attack those sequences. So that way you get to also draw and retire something on your opponent's side. So you can maximize on the value still. Typically with your drive checks and then 2 draws from this, you'll get 4 new cards by the end of your battle phase too. So that's one way of looking at it. And if you're questioning about like other cards too, like Gatling Dragon and Inlet Pulse, they're not really needed. This deck really does. With a combination of this skill, this really card does it all for that sense. For the judgments, I did reduce judgment from 4 to 3 just to make room for other stuff. Also, like this deck will never reach 4 judgments in the order zone. So it is really hard to get 2 guard restrictions from that point of view and then have this massive power up in the long term in the sense too. So ideally this deck is going for 2 judgments in the order zone, so that way you have this passive 10k, not including your Persona ride. And by the second time you use this, you can revive cards like Tidal Assault to give the additional 5k just to make Tidal hit a little bit harder and demand more shield value twice. And of course the card that searches for these Maelstroms and shoves them into the soul is 4 copies of Alecrinus. I hope I said that correctly. If not, feel free to correct me. But other than that, this card literally is epic art, and it's a swapper too, so you can swap into anything. You can even swap to another copy of itself and kind of swap extend in a way. So this helps you guarantee to get to the 4th battle, the 5th battle, and so on. This card also triggers on place in general, so you can revive it with Judgment and still get the benefit of that too. And remember that even in the mid to late game, it's also searching for your Persona red copies, and you can shove other dead cards into Soul that you don't want. The other key pieces that we're playing is 2 copies of Tidal Assault. Tidal is our restander. Again, this will restand at the end of the 2nd battle, assuming that your Vanguard is still in stand position too. This pairs off nicely with an original Maelstrom coming from Soul, where that can attack first and restand if you want to use that red text skill on that Maelstrom. So you can actually get to the minimum of 5 attacks with just having these 2 front row as well. What's cool, on turn 4, you should have enough Soul still to at least use that 1 skill to give your Vanguard an additional 5k. That's really there as like more of a push, especially if you don't have a booster for your Vanguard column. But if you do have a booster, that makes it just even more so harder for your opponent to guard your Vanguard attack, especially if you have guard restriction on it. But having a restander and especially capitalize on the 5k that you get from Judgment is super valuable in this point. I've also tried this where it's just 1 copy of Tidal and then have the other copy become like more of a defensive card. A defensive card that I would suggest and recommend is Twin Cast, so that way you get twice the benefit from that. This deck has a better hand advantage with this approach, but it's not the best hand. There are other decks that are top decks that generate bigger hands. So it's kind of like, okay, can I defend with something that's maybe like a 2-for-1 in a way? So that's why I recommend like Twin Casts. But you're more than welcome to try different blitz orders or different cards too in general. Now this is where I kind of want to slow down for the video itself. You may have seen like Margaret as the thumbnail. We're not only playing Cutlass at max, but we're playing Grade 2 Cyclers, and we have the original ones as Margaret. So whenever in the right face you discard this, you can Soul Blast to draw a card and bottom deck this card. So you're not decking out in the late game. You're also being able to draw an extra card and benefit from the right line discard, but it also helps get one card deeper into your potential key piece that you need coming up soon. This also can come up in your turn 4 when you do Persona Ride. You can actually use the CB to make the front row basically stunned. It's kind of like a pseudo retire in a way. They had to replace them if they had to call over it, if they want to basically use as attackers. And then it makes them not be able to intercept at all from their field. So if you have matchups that intercept on the back row or something like that, this stops it too. This is just like an added effect to make it harder for them to deal with your turn, because they're not only dealing with multi-attack, but they're also dealing with the guard restriction that Glory has. And now you like kind of locked out intercept on top of that. That could actually be game ending, because if they're relying to at least stop one attack, especially if they get a damage trigger too, it's a lot easier to guard if they intercept at that point, or they have some like bigger unit that can intercept, just like in Paldio, for example. They have the Nebula, for example. Now it's up to you with the ratios. I've seen 4 Margaret and also 2 Rumble Brave Shooter. One of the inspirations from this list was actually a Japanese topping list, actually 2 of them that played essentially the 4-2 or the 3-3, and it's really what you value. For me, funny enough, I just don't know where my 4th Margaret is, and I was going with that route first because I feel like if you can just use the Soul Blast instead of an Energy Blast, then you can conserve that for the Dancing Cutlass more. But that's not always the case. You can use the CB instead if you need to for Rumble Shooter and be able to draw that way when you discard it for the right line. Or when you guard, this helps kind of help guarding in a sense too, because again, your 5k shield, draw into another card, and hopefully it's a better card too on top of that, because this deck can have like a lot of grade 3s in hand, and that includes Judgment, that includes copies of Maelstrom, your Persona Ride, copies that really are dead cards. They're cards that you both cannot guard with, and you want them for the following turn still. So like those cards cannot be used for guard. So this just helps in general just to have another card to guard with potentially for the next attack or the same attack as well. This also can have that pseudo revival skill in this way. When you Persona Ride, you add the card from a drop to the hand essentially. That is not Sentinel. I wish it was Sentinel. And it has to be a normal unit, so you can't even grab triggers defensively, but you can maybe grab like a Tidal Assault and a Lacrinus that you may still need, but it does not come up that often, but I wanted to mention it at least. And to wrap up with this like draw package is really the 4 copies of Dancing Cutlass. So I still play 4 of these bad boys. It's the honorary Aquaroid from Grand Blue. Sorry, Night Rose. But it's a great unit. And keep in mind that the grade 2 cyclers are stuck between the right face discard or when you guard with the Rumble Shooter. That's really where they can actually do their skills. Cutlass has a little flexibility because it works in right face and also main face too. So you can use this for the discard for Glory skill to call something from Soul. So you're not doing a 1-for-1 exchange, you're actually going to generate another card on the field as a net result and keep your hand size still. And potentially to a combo piece that you can use that turn too. What's also really good is that if you have 2 copies of Dancing Cutlass in the drop, you can remove them and be able to countercharge it during your main phase. So if you have 2, that's 1 CC. If you have 4 of them, then that's CC 2. And so you can actually have some wiggle room with your Alacrina swappers, your Tidal Assault restanders, and essentially if you need to use some of the grade 2 cyclers, other effects on your Persona Ride turns too. So there's some wiggle room with that. For the rest of the grade 1s, it's what you expect. Again, you're just having those key pieces that you need. 4 copies of Wheel Assault. This is the Soul Blast swapper, so you don't have to rely always on CB. In fact, you can do moderation where you do like maybe 1 CB, 1 Soul Blast. You can do 2 CB and 1 Soul Blast. And you can do patterns like this is behind the Vanguard, or if this is on a rearguard column. It really just depends on how you want to swap your pieces and what you have. Like if you have double Alacrinus, you might want this on like the rearguards or something. But if it's just like 1 Alacrinus and then 1 Wheel Assault, then you can at least get your OG Maelstroms from the back and then put them in the front, and you still maximize on those attack patterns if need to be. And you can have like 2 to 3 Maelstrom attacks still hitting the 4th battle or more. It's all about placement and how you put things, whether it be on a rearguard column or behind the Vanguard, essentially. I actually covered some combo plays in my Glory guide, so if you want to check that out, you feel free to check that out for reference. And then for the rest of the grade 1s, it's just PGs and then Sanctitude. I still do the 3-1 splits. Since I'm not playing any of the Blitz orders, I don't have that conflict. This also gets around guard restrictions too, if you had to like deal with that too. But if you want to go 4 PG, that's also good. Lastly, with the triggers, it's 4 tier dragons. This is actually reachable with algos. So if you literally in your top 7 don't get any viable normal units that are either Aqua Force or Terror Dragon, then you're out of luck. But if you so happen to see one of these, this is an option if you just need a body, essentially. Worst case scenario, you just choose 0 and you leave it in deck. We have 4 copies of Alana, so she's the effect crit that goes into Soul. This doesn't really come up as often, but if you for some reason need Soul, especially if you're heavily dependent on Wheel Assaults and you're not seeing your swappers that are like Alacrinas or your Tidal Assault, then over time you're going to need more Soul, essentially. But if you feel like that's not an issue, you can replace this with normal crits and just have a 5k booster in really niche scenarios too. And essentially for the 9th crit and an extra front, it's really Blessed Favor as our OT. This just is good at every point of the game for this deck too. And it really shines in this. By the time you use other cards, such as like the purple OT, I mean, it's nice to heal if you need to. But to be honest, this deck doesn't want to survive that long. It just kind of wants to really win on turn 4 or weaken the opponent where they can't do anything and then just kind of follow back on the crack pack. After that, I think this deck will run out of gas, essentially. 3 fronts that are 20k shield. So there's Rothian 2 that just came out as the one that goes into Soul. You could also play those instead of this and then play normal crits if you want to. So that way it kind of help fill the Soul that way without calling rearguards in the process of your main phase or your battle phase too. So you can go that route. The reason that I went with 20k fronts is, one, of course, more shield value, but also you're drawing into more cards. So it's not always guaranteed that you're drawn into a unit that is a normal unit, essentially. You can draw your triggers, so why not just maximize on a 20k shield, essentially? So that helps a ton. In my Glory guide, I think I played like draw triggers too, because again, you need combo pieces, but because you added cards such as like the grade 2 cyclers now with Cutlass, you're just drawing cards through that engine itself, and you're like at a point where like, well, I want to draw decent value at least. And drawing a draw trigger manually like that, it isn't the best feeling. So that's why I went with the fronts myself. And then lastly, it's just 4 heals of whatever you want it to be. I just have normal heals. There's a lot of like different effects. If I feel like there's a certain matchup I want to deal with, I can do the 3-1 ratio, which I recommend most of my deck builds. You could do the 2-2 split if you want to, but I'm just playing normal 15k shields. But yeah, and that's really the deck profile. I just wanted to show this off, this different approach. I thought it was cool. I wanted to try it out. I do like it. I will be honest though, like it does the same thing pretty much every game. So it can get a little bit boring to play after a while. And it's just the nature sometimes with these decks. Like you wanted to do the one thing really good and really consistent. And that's part of it, because these are just really filler cards to get to your actual key pieces, right? It's like Upstart Goblins in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Jar Greeds, for example. But I think it does help in competitive aspects. So if I were to take Glory Maelstrom, for example, I would definitely lean more to this. I'd rather have it be consistent on what it actually does, and if it helps me have enough hand to guard with, you know, a lot of attacks or just crazy attack numbers and guard restrictions, you know, I feel like more safer with this deck too, if I were to choose a build of whatever Glory build I'm trying to do. Feel free to share like any other deck ideas or attacks or even build suggestions. Have you tried this yourself too? Have you thought about this too, but never really like made the jump? I thought of cyclers before, but then when I saw that list, like just to like extra, like be extra with the cyclers, I felt like that was actually the right call for this deck. So that's why I even tried it myself. And again, if you want to know more of like the in-depthness with Glory Maelstrom as a card by card explanation, you can check out my Glory guide. I also cover combos and other decks that you may want to try out too, and other cards that I tried out and why I didn't play them as well. Till next time. Bye.